The Wee Freemen, Chapter 11, Awakening. On the other side of the clearing, where the nut-cracking man had been at work, was the last nut, half as high as Tiffany, and it was rocking gently. The cracker took a swipe at it with the hammer, and it rolled out of the way. "See what's really there," said Tiffany to herself, and she laughed. The Queen gave her a puzzled look. "You find this funny?" she demanded. "What is funny about this? What could be amusing at this situation?" "I just had a funny thought," said Tiffany, and the Queen glared, as people without a sense of humor do when they're confronted with a smile. "You're not very clever," thought Tiffany. "You've never needed to be. You can just get what you want by dreaming it, and you believe in your dream so you never have to think." She turned and whispered to Roland, "Crack the nut. Don't worry about what I do. Crack that nut." The boy looked at her blankly. "What did you just say to him?" snapped the Queen. "I said goodbye," said Tiffany, holding on tightly to her brother. "I'm not handing my brother over, no matter what you do." "Do you want to know what color your insides are?" asked the Queen. Tiffany shook her head mutely. "Well, now you're going to find out," said the Queen, smiling sweetly. "You're not powerful enough to do anything like that," said Tiffany. "You know, you are right," said the Queen. "That kind of physical magic is indeed very hard, but I can make you think that I've done the most terrible things, and that, little girl, is all I need to do. Would you like to beg for mercy now? You might not be able to later." Tiffany paused. "No, I don't think I will," she said. The Queen leaned down. Her gray eyes filled Tiffany's world. "People around here will remember this for a very long time," she said. "Oh, I hope so," said Tiffany. "Crack the nut." And for a moment the Queen looked puzzled again. She wasn't good at dealing with sudden changes. "What? Huh? Oh, right," muttered Roland. "What did you say to him?" the Queen demanded, as the boy ran toward the hammer man. Tiffany kicked her in the leg. It wasn't a very witch thing to do, but it was a very 9-year-old thing to do, and she wished she could have thought of something better. On the other hand, though, she was wearing hard boots, and it was a very good kick. The Queen shook her. "Why did you do that?" she said. "Why won't you just do what I say? Everyone could be so happy if they would just do what I say." Tiffany stared at the woman's face. The eyes were gray now, but the pupils were like silver mirrors. "I know what you are," said her third thoughts. "You're something that's never learned anything. You don't know anything about people. You're a child that got old." "Want a sweetie?" she whispered. And there was a shout behind her. She twisted in the Queen's grip, and she saw Roland fighting for the hammer. As she watched, he turned desperately and raised that heavy thing over his head, knocking over the elf behind him. The Queen pulled her around savagely as the hammer fell. "Sweetie," she said, "I'll show you, sweet—" "Cravens! It's the Queen, and she got her kilda, and the old topher. Nay, Queen, nay, laird, Wee Freemen. Oh, I could murder a kebab. Get her!" Tiffany might have been the only person in all of the worlds that there are to be happy to hear the sound of a knack McFeagle. They poured out of that smashed nut. Some were still wearing bow ties. Some were back in their kilts, but they were all in a fighting mood. And to save time, they were fighting one another, just to get up to speed. The clearing cleared. Real or dreams, the people could see trouble when it rolled toward them in a roaring, cursing red and blue tide. Tiffany ducked out of the Queen's grasp, and she hurried into the grasses to watch. Big Jan ran past, carrying a struggling full-sized elf over his head, and then he just stopped suddenly, and he tossed it high over the clearing. "And away he goes, right on his head!" he yelled, and then he turned and ran back into battle. The Nakmekfeegle couldn't be trodden on or squeezed. They worked in groups, running up one another's backs to get high enough to punch an elf, or preferably bash it with their heads. And once anyone was down, then they all took over kicking. There was some method in the way the Nakmekfeegle fought. For example, they always chose the biggest opponent because, as Rob Anybody said later, makes them easier to hit, you can. And they simply didn't stop. It was just that wore people down. It was like being attacked by wasps with fists. It took them a little while to realize that they'd run out of people to fight, so they just went on fighting one another for a bit anyway. I mean, they'd come all that way. Then they settled down and began to go through the pockets of the fallen in case there was any loose change. Tiffany stood up. "Ah, well, not a bad job though I say it myself," said Rob Anybody, looking around. "Very neat fight, and we didn't even have to resort to using poetry." "How did you get into the nut?" asked Tiffany. "I mean, it's a nut." "Only way we could find in," said Rob Anybody. "It's got to be the way that fits. 'Tis difficult work, navigating dreams." "Especially when you're a wee bitty sloshed," said Daft Willie, grinning broadly. "What? You've been drinking?" said Tiffany. "I've been facing the Queen, and you've been in a pub?" "Ach, no," said Rob Anybody. "You ken that dream with the big party, when you had the pretty frock on and all? We got stuck in it." "But I killed the drome." Rob looked a little shifty. "Well," he said, "we didn't get out as quickly as you. Took us a wee while." "Took us until we finished up all the drink," said Daft Willie, helpfully. Rob glared at him. "You didn't have to put it like that," he snapped. You mean dreams just keep going on?" asked Tiffany. "If you're thirsty enough, yes," said Daft Willie. "And it wasn't just the drink. There was a canapes as well." "But I thought if you ate or drank in one of those dreams you had to stay there," said Tiffany. "Aye, for most creatures," said Rob Anybody. "Not for us, though. Hooses, banks, dreams, it's all the same to us. There's nothing we can't cannot get in or out of." "Except maybe pubs," said Big Jan. "Oh, aye," said Rob, very cheerfully. "Getting out of pubs sometimes causes us a certain amount of difficulty, I'll grant ye that." "Where did the Queen go?" Tiffany asked. "Och, she did Novsky as soon as we arrived," said Rob Anybody. "And so should we, Kelda, afore this dream changes." And he nodded at Wentworth. "Oh, is that the wee bairn? Oh, what a nose full of boogies." "What a sweetie!" said Wentworth, on automatic candy pilot. "Well, you canna have none," shouted Rob Anybody. "And stop your snivelling and come away with us and stop being a burden to your poor wee sister." Tiffany opened her mouth to protest, and then she shut it again when Wentworth, after a moment of shock, chuckled. "Funny," he said. "Wee man, wee man." "Oh dear," said Tiffany. "You've got him started again." But she was very surprised nonetheless. Wentworth never showed this much interest in anyone who wasn't a jelly baby. "Rob, we got a real one here," a pixie called out. And to her horror, Tiffany saw that several of the Nakmekfeegle were holding up Roland's unconscious head. He was full length on the ground. "Aye, that was the laddie that was rude to ye," said Rob. "And he tried to hit Big Jan with a hammer too. It wasn't a clever thing to try. What shall we do with him?" The grasses trembled. The light was fading from the sky, and the air was growing colder. "We can't leave him here," said Tiffany. "Okay, we'll drag him along," said Rob Anybody. Let's move it though, right now. Wee, wee man, wee, wee man, said Wentworth gleefully. He's going to be like this all day, said Tiffany. Sorry. Run for the door, said Rob Anybody. Can you not see the door? Tiffany looked around desperately. The wind was bitter now. See the door, commanded Rob Anybody, and she blinked and spun around. She said. The sense of a world beneath that had come to her when she was frightened of the Queen. Didn't turn up so easily now, so she tried to concentrate and sense the smell of snow. I mean, it was ridiculous talking about the smell of snow. It was just pure frozen water. But Tiffany always knew when she woke up if it had snowed during the night. Snow had a smell, kind of like the taste of tin. Tin did have a taste, although admittedly it tasted like the smell of snow. She thought she heard her brain creak with the effort of thinking. If she was in a dream, then she had to wake up. There was no use in running. Dreams were full of running. But there was one direction that looked thin and white. So she shut her eyes and thought about snow, crisp and white as fresh bed sheets. She concentrated on the feel of it under her feet. All she had to do was wake up. She was standing in snow. Right, said Rob Anybody. I got out, said Tiffany. Ah, well, sometimes the door's just in your own head, said Rob Anybody. Now let's move. Tiffany felt herself lifted into the air. Nearby, a snoring Roland rose up on dozens of small blue legs as the Feagles got underneath of him. Nae stopping till we get right out of here, said Rob Anybody. Feagles, what hey! And they skimmed over the snow, with parties of Feagles running on ahead. After a minute or two, Tiffany looked behind them and saw the blue shadows spreading, and they were getting darker too. Rob? She said. Aye, I can, said Rob. Run, lads! They're moving fast, Rob. I ken that too. Snow stung Tiffany's face. Trees blurred with the speed. The forest sped past, but the shadows were spreading across the path ahead, and every time the party ran through them, they seemed to have a certain solidity, like fog. Now the shadows behind were night black in the middle. But the Pixies had passed the last tree, and the snowfield stretched ahead. And they stopped. So quickly Tiffany almost toppled into the snow. What happened? Where's all of our old footprints gone? Said Daft Woolly. They was here a moment ago. Now which way now? And they trampled back, which had led them on to like a line, but it had vanished. Rob Anybody spun around and looked back at the forest. Darkness curled above it like smoke, spreading along the horizon. She's sending nightmares after us, he growled. Oh, this is going to be a toughie, lads. Tiffany saw shapes in the spreading night, and she hugged Wentworth tightly. Nightmares, said Rob Anybody, turning to her. You wouldn't want to know about them. We'll hold 'em off. You must make a run for it, so get away with you now. But I have nowhere to run to, said Tiffany. She heard a high-pitched noise, a sort of chittering, insect noise, coming from the forest. The Pixies had drawn together. Usually they grinned like anything if they thought a good fight was coming up, but this time they looked deadly serious. Och, she's a bad loser, that Queen, said Rob. Tiffany turned to look at the horizon behind her. The boiling blackness was there too, a ring that was closing in from all sides. Doors everywhere, she thought. The old Kelda said there's doors everywhere, so I have to find a door, but there's just snow and a few trees. The Pixies drew their swords. What kind of nightmares are coming? Asked Tiffany. Och, long-leggedy things with muckle legs and huge teeth and flappy wings and 100 eyes, that kind of stuff, said Daft Woolly. Aye, and worse than that, said Rob Anybody, staring at the speeding dark. What is worse than that? Asked Tiffany. Normal stuff gone wrong, said Rob. Tiffany looked blank for a moment, and then she shuddered. Oh, she knew about those nightmares. They didn't happen often, but they were horrible when they did. She'd woken up once shaking at the thought of Granny Aking's boots, which had been chasing her, and another time it was a box of sugar. Anything could be a nightmare. She could put up with monsters, but she did not want to face mad boots. I have an idea, she said. So do I, said Rob Anybody. Dinna be here. That's my idea. Well, there's a clump of trees right over there, said Tiffany. So what? Said Rob. He was staring at the line of nightmares. Things were visible in it now. Teeth, claws, eyes, ribs. From the way he was glaring, it was obvious that whatever happened later, the first few monsters were going to face a very serious problem. If they had faces anyway. Can you even fight nightmares? Asked Tiffany. The chittering noise was getting a lot louder. There's not a thing we canna fight, growled Big Jan. If it's got a head, we can get a face full of dandruff, and if it doesn't have a head, it's due for a good kicking. Tiffany stared at the onrushing things. But some of them have more than one head, she said. Ugh, it's our lucky day then, said Daft Woolly. The pixies shifted their weight, ready to fight. Piper, said Rob Anybody to William the Gonigal. Play us a lament. We'll fight to the sound of the mouse pipes. No, said Tiffany. I'm not standing for this. The way to fight nightmares is to wake up. I am your Kelda, and that is an order. We are headed for those trees right now. Do what I say. Wee man, said Wentworth. The pixies glanced at the trees, and then at Tiffany. Do it, she yelled so loudly some of the pixies flinched. Right now, you do what I tell you. There is a better way. You canna cross a hag, Rob, muttered William. I am going to get you home, snapped Tiffany. I hope, she added to herself. But she had seen a small, round, pale face staring at them around a tree trunk. There was a drome in those trees. Ach, aye, but... Rob Anybody glanced past Tiffany and added, Aw, no, look at that. There was a pale dot in front of the racing line of monstrousness. Sneebs was making a break for it. His arms pumped like pistons, his little legs seemed to spin, his cheeks were like balloons, and the tide of nightmares rolled over him and just kept coming. Rob sheathed his sword. You heard our Kelda, lads! Grab her! We're off-ski! Tiffany was lifted up. Feagles raised the unconscious Roland, and everybody ran for the trees. Tiffany pulled her hand out of her apron pocket and looked at the crumpled wrapper of Jolly Sailor tobacco. It was something she could focus on to remind her of a dream. People said you could see the sea from the very top of the downs, but Tiffany had stared hard on a fine winter's day when the air was very clear and she had seen nothing but a hazy blue distance. But the sea on the Jolly Sailor packet was a deep blue with white crests on the waves, and it was the sea for Tiffany. It had looked like a very small drome from the trees. That meant it wasn't very powerful. She hoped so. She had to hope so. The trees got closer, and so did the ring of nightmares. Some of the sounds were horrible, of cracking bones and crushing rocks and stinging insects and screaming cats, getting nearer and nearer and nearer.